Muy buenos días, estamos en República Dominicana y gracias por ser el anfitrión de este importante evento. And a warm welcome to the first side event of the series of organized side events organized by the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, or the PCCB, in collaboration with the PCCB Network and the UNFCCC Regional Climate Weeks. My name is Rosibel Martinez, and in representation of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, as a member and also as the lead of Working Group 2, which focuses on cross-cutting issues. I will be moderating this first session for the side event series on capacities needed to horizontal and vertical integration of national determined contributions, or NDCs. But before I go deeper into the theme of this event and introduce our panelists, I'd like to quickly introduce you to the PCCB for those who are not so familiar. The Paris Committee on Capacity Building, or PCCB, was established at COP21 in 2015 to address current and emerging gaps and needs in implementing capacity building in developing countries, and in further enhancing capacity building efforts, including coherence and coordination activities under the convention. The PCCB consists of 12 members from developed and developing countries. It meets only once a year, regularly at the June session, or the ESBs, and reports to the Conference of the Parties as well as the Paris Agreement. The PCCB also set up its PCCB Network in April of 2020 as a voluntary association of interested stakeholders engaged in climate-related capacity building who can share information on good practices of their work, contribute to the work of the PCCB in fulfilling its mandate, and seek to connect with other peers across sectors and across regions. To know more about the PCCB Network, or on how to stay updated with the UNFCCC capacity building work, you can scan the QR code on the screen. Through the link, you will find also a post-event survey that will please help us to report back and improve future events by providing a brief feedback through the LinkedIn form after this event. We will gladly appreciate that you can do this for us to do a better work for our mandate. With that being said, let me set the context of today's event and the theme. At the fifth meeting of the PCCB in June of 2021, the PCCB agreed on building capacity to facilitate coherent implementation of NDCs in the context of national development plans and sustainable recovery. This as its focus area for 2022. Considering this annual focus area, the PCCB, in collaboration with the PCCB Network, with this first event in a series of events that are going to happen at other regional climate weeks, aims to facilitate the exploration of what capacities are needed for horizontal and vertical integration of national determined contributions in the Latin American and Caribbean region. The horizontal and vertical integration of NDCs provides opportunities for greater policy coherence, synergies, efficiency. And in this context, there is also a need to build capacities to mobilize such opportunities related to different integration approaches. Aligning climate and development agendas and integrating NDCs across the board could enhance horizontal policy coherence, and at the same time, integration of NDCs at different levels of governance, namely regional, national, and local, could enhance vertical policy coherence. In order to discuss such approaches of integration, this side event will be implemented as part of the PCCB's efforts to promote strategic stakeholder engagement, to foster exchange of capacity building at the national or regional level. This side event seeks to provide a space for members of the PCCB network and other relevant capacity building stakeholders to share their experiences, exchange knowledge, case studies, best practices of their work related to policy coherence, and specifically in terms of the role of capacity building on the horizontal and the vertical integration of NDCs. In doing exactly that, with great pleasure, I'd like now to welcome our panelists. And we have here Ms. Natalie Flores Gonzalez, Director of Climate Change Adaptation Mitigation from the Minister of Natural Resource, Environment and Natural Resources of Dominican Republic. We already know our host of this event. We have Ms. Clarissa Lene, Country Engagement Specialist from NDC Partnership. And we have Dr. Fernanda Carvalho, Global Policy Manager, Climate and Energy from WWF International, in which we are, she will be participating virtually. Welcome, Ms. Carvalho. So now I'd like to hand over to our panelists. So now to give us like a 9-second overview on what is your role in capacity building efforts and for NDCs. And we will start with Natalie, and then we'll hand it to Clarissa, and finally to Fernanda. Go ahead, Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rosibel. Welcome to the Dominican Republic to all of you. We are very happy to have you here. I'm Climate Change Director for specifically with focus in adaptation and mitigation, because we have other directors that oversees finance and everything. And I'm very happy to have you here. It's been chaotic, but at the end, fulfilling to organize this event and to be able to share with you a little bit of what we do in our country in terms of capacity building. So the first thing I'm going to mention is that the Dominican Republic presented an enhanced NDC in October 2020, which reinforced our compromise of reducing emissions from 25% to 27% of emissions in respect to the business as usual. This is important because before our first INDC was all conditioned to international cooperation. Right now, our NDC, it's supposed to have a more robust goal, right? In which we aim to conditionate 20% of our emission reductions related with international cooperation, 5% to private sector of the Dominican Republic, and 2% to the public sector. In capacity building terms, this is important because we are establishing basically a challenge for our country. We cannot reduce emissions if we don't follow the guidelines that we receive from the convention and from the Paris Agreement to build capacity in which the private sector of the Dominican Republic and other stakeholders improve the way in which they implement the emissions reductions. I'm talking a lot about emissions reductions because we have a very robust institutional arrangement set up in the Dominican Republic. We have climate change adaptation in our constitution. We have a national development law in which the whole environmental axis is focused on climate change adaptation. And of course, it's the only law that establishes an emission reductions quota until 2030. All of this is, let's say, the basis for the Dominican Republic to establish the way in which we are going to build capacity. We have the private sector working on energy, working on infrastructure, working on the tourism sector, waste management, but without this commitment further than the institutional arrangements, which is to build the capacity in which people can actually reach their mission. We are not going to be able to reach these goals. So I'm gonna leave it there, and we continue with the other questions, and I'm gonna hand over the mic to Clarissa.
Well, thank you, Natalie.
Yeah,
So maybe just to provide a quick introduction to the NDC Partnership for those that aren't aware, we're a global coalition of countries and institutions that are working together to further climate action and also enhance sustainable development. So at the moment, we're at 204 members, I think. That number keeps changing. That includes 119 developing and developed countries, 49 institutions, and 36 associate members, which are primarily NGOs. Now, the way this model works is that country governments identify their priorities for NDC implementation. They identify any support gaps that are preventing them from moving those priorities to actionable policies and programs. And then in response to those requests that we get from our country members, development partners and implementing partners put together a tailored package of expertise, technical assistance, and funding, whatever is required to try to plug those gaps. Capacity building is an essential ingredient in that package. We're seeing a lot of capacity gaps in the LAC region and beyond the region. In my role as a country engagement specialist for the support unit, I primarily focus on countries in the Caribbean, but also beyond the Caribbean. And we've seen a lot of uptake of, a lot of submissions of requests related to capacity building across various sectors. I'll leave it there for the moment because I know we have a lot of questions to get through, but maybe I'll pass things off to Fernanda.
Yes. Thanks, Clarissa. Fernanda, the floor is yours. Dr. Cavallo.
Apologies for the delay. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I have been doing this for so long and I still had some trouble getting off mute, but it's a pleasure to be here in an all-female panel with my colleagues Rosibel, Natalie, and Clarissa. So my name is Fernanda Carvalho. I'm based in Brazil, so I have a lot of knowledge of Latin American issues as being Brazilian. And I work as Global Policy Manager of WWF International. And we have been working on an initiative since 2020 that it's called the NDCs We Want. And we started analyzing NDCs, the NDCs submitted then, up to now with in 5 areas and 20 criterias. And we are very interested in policies and implementation because this is the new challenge now since the first round of NDCs is passed. We have a double challenge now because we are not on track to 1.5, and we also have to start focusing on implementation. And we started looking at the LAC NDCs, and we classified the NDCs from NDCs we want to NDCs that have a short way to go, a long way to go, and some way to go, a long way to go, and NDCs we don't want. And for last year, we did a report on the LAC NDCs, and the LAC NDCs are very, very interesting because we have 5 NDCs we want, which are from Colombia, Suriname, Dominican Republic, Panama, and Costa Rica. We're going to talk a little bit about this if we have time. We have 4 NDCs that have a short way to go, and those are Jamaica, Chile, also Argentina, and there is another one which is Ecuador. Ecuador didn't submit a new NDC, but they did an update in 2019, so we consider this update. And Brazil and Mexico are the NDCs that, of course, they're the biggest countries in the area, but they're not performing that great, and they should. And this work entails a lot of looking at horizontal and vertical integration. So this will be my contribution in the event. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Carvalho. Definitely, you have shared your role and the importance of the engagement of the public sector, and I know that in the next round of questions, there's going to be a 30-minute panel. You can provide more information, detailed information about what are you doing in your countries.
Yep.
So now we're going to open the floor for the panelists for today's discussion with an assessment of the role of capacity building in the horizontal and vertical integration of NDCs and the status quo of such integration efforts in the LAC region. So our first question today would be, what is the status quo of horizontal and vertical integration of NDCs in the LAC region or country? And what is the role of capacity building in this context? And now we can have 3 minutes because of time constraints, but we invite you to take the floor and please 3 minutes for your discussion.
Okay, I'll try to be brief because I speak a lot.
You said you throw a lot to the table in the first place.
Yes. I'm gonna talk about the Dominican Republic, of course, because I've seen other experiences from other countries, but in our country, at the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, we are implementing right now two very ambitious initiatives on capacity building. One is the capacity building for the implementation of our national adaptation plan, and the other is the capacity building initiative for transparency. So in our case, as I mentioned before, a little bit of our institutional arrangements, we decided to implement these projects because we found it key in two terms. The first term is our mandate, constitutional mandate, to adaptate to climate change and fight resilience, and that's why we need to build capacity on our national adaptation plans. And the other one is the capacity building for transparency. Why is the relevance of building capacity on transparency? The Dominican Republic just promulgate the president. I don't know if that's the word. I think in Spanish because that's my mother language, but the president set up a new decree for the establishment of our MRV system. So we are working with support of the Green Climate Fund and the GEF and UNEP to build capacity on transparency. We've been teaching literally with national universities, with scientists on how our institutions, private, public, civil society, non-party stakeholders should report and honor this legal framework of transparency and emissions reporting. At this point, I think those are the two biggest achievements that we have in terms of building capacity, but we have a long-term story on developing on a strategy with UNITAR for capacity building in terms of climate change in general that I can mention in the other questions.
Thank you, Natalie. I didn't mention that you have very interesting information that you have shared. It will not be up to me to try to collect it, but I will leave it to the audience. So you have at the end of the panel 15 minutes for Q&A. So go ahead, Grace. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosibel. Thank you, Natalie. That was really interesting. I think from our perspective, I'll start with vertical integration maybe, or what we call NDC mainstreaming. One of the foundational aspects of the way that the partnership works is to always engage both the environmental ministry or a related entity and the ministries of finance and or planning. So for example, in the Dominican Republic, we work with both the National Council on Climate Change and the Planning Ministry, or MIPID. And this has been really fundamental to helping us surface requests and respond to requests from those ministries, often relating to mainstreaming NDCs into planning, budgeting, public investment management, and most recently, COVID recovery efforts. So on that final point, for example, we launched the Economic Advisory Initiative, which I think has benefited 10 countries in the LAC region so far. And the aim there was really to embed economic advisors in these ministries to help them come up with green recovery plans that would not contravene their climate objectives. In Colombia, for example, several advisors worked on the development of a national strategy for sustainable recovery. Sorry, it's not one of my countries, so I have to think of the names. And this strategy encompassed a huge range of sectors, which I think goes to the heart of what we're talking about in terms of mainstreaming climate objectives across sectors and across sectoral entities as well in the way that they operate. On the vertical integration side, I have to say I think it's been a bit more of a learning curve for us because we primarily engage with national governments. That being said, we are doing more to engage through those national governments to subnational entities and regional entities. Also through embedding subnational advisors, for example. We have seen remarkable progress in some countries in this region. In Peru, for example, they're working on developing a capacity building program for sectoral and regional public officials. I believe they're calling it the Public Management Program for Climate Action. And the idea is to really capacitate officials at every level to develop a form of climate action network across the country. So as you can see from those examples, capacity building is really at the heart of both horizontal and vertical mainstreaming. We've also been trying to further those efforts at the global level through our own knowledge and learning programs. So for example, in 2021, the partnership organized a number of events and put out, I think, 21 knowledge products to try to really disseminate some of the lessons learned that we're seeing coming from country members. I'll leave it there for the moment. Again, I know we're on a tight time frame, but I'll pass things off to Fernanda.
Thank you, Carice. Dr. Carvalho. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will try to stick to the time as well, but I wanted to bring some concrete examples. And I think vertical and horizontal integration are, of course, at the heart of good delivery of NDCs. And on vertical integration, the coordination among the different levels of government, we have some good examples in the region. We have Argentina, for example, that has a provincial articulation table to discuss with subnational governments. We see in the Colombia NDCs 89 subnational measures and also 148 at the national level. Chile is going to pilot 4 regional plans in 4 administrative regions. And another example would be Colombia, I already mentioned. So yeah, those are examples of vertical integration. And on the horizontal side, we also see that, for example, Chile is focusing on a financial strategy on climate change. Argentina is also developing a financial plan. I think the Dominican Republic did a good job of trying to define their conditional and unconditional targets in terms of what would be the needs and what would be private sector contribution and public sector contribution. And I think that capacity building has a key role for the good developments of NDCs in those aspects. We see that the NDCs that have really sound horizontal and vertical integration considerations are the ones that received support by international institutions or clusters of international institutions such as UNDP, UNEP, have been supported by the NDC Partnership, of which WWF is also one of the associate members. So I think the capacity building should make a difference. And one of the aspects that I should highlight is really the finance aspect and the integration with financial ministries, because at the end of the days, those are the ones that hold the keys to the safe. And it's really important that when an NDC is put out, it really integrates with the finance discussions and the budget discussions in the country. Of course, the development discussions as well. And the more we invest on capacity building, the more those documents or those plans that NDCs are supposed to be will be more of a social pact rather than just a climate target. So this is the kind of exercise we have been seeing in the region so far. And I hope I stuck to my time for this question. Over.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cavallo. I know you all did. We have another question, but just taking some elements of what you have mentioned, Natalie, about your building capacity for NAP and for MRV. Clarissa, working with the environmental ministry in finance, you mentioned as well. That is very important. That is Dr. Carvalho was just mentioning. You know how we integrate our Ministry of Finance, because at the end of the day, that's what you need to move and to implement our NDCs. So we're going to move now to another question regarding the capacity needs and gaps related to such integration efforts, and if there are any best examples, which I know you already have stated. But the question would be, what is needed to scale up capacities and capacity building efforts towards successful horizontal and vertical integrations of NDCs? Thank you. Go ahead, Natalia.
Okay. Well, the first thing is to do an assessment, internal, like a capacity needs assessment, basically of what your country needs for specific gaps on capacity building. As Clarissa mentioned, we are working with the NDC Partnership to present an enhanced NDC that we already presented, and with the Ministry of Finance, the National Council for Climate Change, that has all the government institutions related to climate action. What we did was first identified our gaps with support of the support unit of the NDC Partnership. And after we identified the gaps, we made a plan on how we were going to approach the capacity building needs within the NDC specifically. So that was an exercise in which we brought to the table all the stakeholders, as I mentioned before. And from there, we developed a chapter in our NDC related to transversal access, including capacity building, gender issues, youth issues, and all these topics that are not only limited to the big adaptation and mitigation of any climate action that you take, but for that transversal part. Our institutions, such as the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Tourism, has been working with us with international cooperation as well to identify those gaps on other issues that needs capacity building approach, as building resilience, working on waste management, as I mentioned before. So I think the baseline of having in an NDC capacity building as a transversal axis is fundamental, and it's key to be able to develop other initiatives that take into account our capacity building needs. Right now we are trying to work on the establishment of the financial climate architecture. Actually, I take the opportunity to mention that we have an action hub on that topic tomorrow at 12, if you want to come. And mostly, like the big part of the project is capacity building on the establishment of the financial architecture. If we wouldn't have that in our NDC, we wouldn't be able to put it in our work program to the country program to the Green Climate Fund, and we wouldn't be able to establish such projects. So I'll leave it there.
Great,
Thanks.
Great, Natalie. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Rosamund. Sorry. I think I was really encouraged to hear Natalie talk about the need for a needs assessment before you get going, because this is something that we've seen come through really strongly. So at the country level, initially take stock. Where is capacity actually? Where does it need to be strengthened? We've seen this, for example, now in Panama. They're working on doing a needs diagnosis in order to come up with a very tailored capacity building plan. And that'll also involve looking at software and hardware needs for climate and data management in the financial sector, for example. So really getting very specific about what gaps there are and not just copy pasting capacity building models that you've used in some countries in the hopes that they'll, somehow manage to plug the holes that you have. I think from our perspective, there's also really a need on the partner side to analyze the kinds of requests that we're getting before you do your programming. So think about, we do that very systematically from the NDC Partnership side. We really try to look at what's coming in and deliver those messages to our partners to say, look, here's where we're seeing some weaker areas. One example of how we tried to respond to something that was coming very strongly from a lot of the country members, for example, was a general lack of capacity in central banks. So at COP26, we launched the Readiness Support for Greening Central Banks initiative. And the intention there is to really make sure that central banks have the knowledge, the institutional capacity, the processes and systems in place to adopt a very precautionary approach to climate-related financial risks. I think in the region at the moment, we're currently rolling that out at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the Bank of Jamaica, and in the Dominican Republic as well. It's still a new initiative, but I think I've been really encouraged to see how we're bringing in a new entity and really making sure that we're mainstreaming these messages and the response across any relevant entity. Another thing that's actually three aspects have come across very strongly when we were doing our analysis of the requests that we're getting for capacity building. One we've already touched on, which is national planning and budgeting. So really training the relevant officials in how to prepare climate-informed budgets and strategies. Another one, which I'm sure you'll hear over and over again throughout the course of this week, is more support for project identification and development. So there, for example, again, through the Economic Advisory Initiative, in Antigua and Barbuda, we deployed an economic advisor who helped them operationalize a project management unit, which now will be able to take forward some of the objectives that they've done their planning, and now they're really trying to mobilize resources, and hopefully they now have the in-house capacity to do that. I think they're also trying to continue that work by developing a technical manual for that unit now. And the final point that I wanted to highlight here, which is related, is mobilization for climate finance. A lot of countries are, again, at this implementation point. They want to get going, but they don't necessarily have the mechanisms in place to do that. So we've also seen economic advisors work on developing mechanisms like green bonds, like guarantee systems. For example, in Grenada, they've been working on something along those lines. So finally, just to summarize, I think, again, the NDC Partnership will always be trying to surface lessons learned that we've seen. We've been trying to do that during the course of this week through our regional exchange, which has been co-organized with the UNFCCC. And I hope that this is an ongoing conversation to make sure that we're responding to countries' needs first and foremost, and not putting the programming before listening to what's actually needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cavallo. Go ahead.
Well, as mentioned previously by my colleagues, the biggest gap that we have seen in our analysis and in our work of supporting countries is, of course, financial aspects mentioned here. Countries need to develop a financial architecture. Clarissa mentioned the role of central banks, which is very, very key. And another aspect is when you do an NDC, defining what's conditional and what's unconditional. Many of the NDCs of this region have this conditional element. And of course, we are asking developed countries to define how much they're going to support developing countries in their NDCs. But on the other side, when you define that a part of your NDC is conditional, the condition should be clear, specific, and actionable to build credibility from donors. So I think this is an important action where an important aspect where capacity building is very, very needed. Other aspects that we analyze according to our methodology is fostering systemic change, because as I mentioned before, to stay on a 1.5 pathway, the IPCC has stated we need systemic change. So how we work with the various sectors needed to achieve success in the climate context is very, very important. You see that some NDCs mention water management, water security, agriculture. So how you address the system as a whole, rather than just focusing on specific sectors for mitigation or adaptation actions, is something where countries also need to develop their capacities, their contribution to development, and that means their integration with SDGs. Also a focus on nature, which is such a big thing in this region. And I also think that it's very important then that at a planning level, countries look at what they need to deliver under other conventions, because, you know, those are all different reports and documents that they need to submit to different conventions and international requirements and commitments. But it's one government working with a specific pool of resources of their national budget and also with international cooperation. So I think those would be the needs for capacity buildings in NDCs I would identify for now. I think the work that has been done in LAC is very, very important, but I see a lot of potential for all those areas to deliver more in terms of impacts. And I think a capacity building programs and the capacity building committee can make a big difference and improve the quality on NDCs in those aspects that I mentioned: finance, a systemic focus, and the contribution to development. Over. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Carvalho. I've been hearing financial, Ministry of Finance. I hope in the audience we have people that represent this ministry, because really we need them to be on board. So now we open the floor, please, for thank you for panelists for this rich discussion. We have 15 minutes for Q&A, and my colleague Riti from the PCCB Network is going to help us out.
Axel Michaelova from Perspectives. My question would relate to the role of Article 6 in providing NDC financing, and how to integrate the institution setting that you need for Article 6 in the institution setting that you need for the NDC implementation. How can this be streamlined that these don't become parallel processes? Thank you.
Is that directed to all of them, or specifically to one? Oh, okay, thank you.
Article 6 of the Paris Agreement or Article 6 of the Convention? Okay. Well, and again, I'm going to talk about our case. When we presented our enhanced NDC, we were not done with the negotiations of the Paris Agreement. We actually presented the NDC 1 year before we finalized Article 6 and the rule book of the Paris Agreement. But right now we are trying to implement these decisions in our action plan that we are actually working with the NDC Partnership. And also we are working with partners such as a company called Alcott that is working in many Latin American countries, in Colombia and Dominican Republic, building capacity in our transparency teams and our mitigation team. We are targeting those two first, so we can develop the strategy that we established in our NDC, align with the decisions that we took in Glasgow last year. And in our case, it's been very successful because we have done South-South cooperation with Colombia, and specifically we have done regional cooperation with other countries on the frame of the Central American Integration System that we call SICA. And we are also developing a new project focused on capacity needs for the implementation of Article 6 with support of UNEP and the Green Climate Fund. So basically, right now, what we are trying to do is raise internal awareness to define what our gaps are and then going further. And in a specific, because we are in development of this new sustainable development mechanism after the Paris rulebook that we need to insert in what we already changed. But the good opportunity that the Dominican Republic has is to include that in our action plan that we are also launching this week, and that you're going to see that plans reflected over there.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm glad you brought this up. I think Article 6 and carbon markets are a really live issue. We're seeing, well, actually not that many requests coming in just yet, but just a lot of curiosity around this, particularly from the donor and implementing partner side. I think this is an area that a lot of people expect to see grow very, very quickly during the next couple of years. What I would say at this point is that we really need to again be as country driven as possible in this process. I think there's a lot of appetite to get into this area again on the donor side, but a bit of hesitancy from developing countries. And what I would say is it's the same model that we've always followed, which is coordinating as much as possible between donors and country, making sure that countries have that national capacity to do donor coordination and more broadly coordinate their climate actions, whether they be related to Article 6 or other areas. So the NDC action plan that the Dominican Republic is launching on Thursday is one example of this, of really systematic effort to try to map all of the things that we're doing. And then once you have that baseline, maybe you can establish where to fit in any programming related to carbon markets. But again, I am a little bit concerned that we're putting the cart before the horse here, and I'd be really interested also to hear whether, Perspectives has seen this done effectively, specifically capacity building on this topic in any particular country. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Verice. I don't know if Dr. Caballo wants to.
Yeah, I think that, what we have seen in NDC is that, the information on clarity, transparency, and understanding required by the UNFCCC is if countries intend to use Article 6 for the achievement of their NDCs, and most countries say yes. Surprisingly, some countries say not for now, like the US and even Brazil said yes, but we need, more detailed financial plans to see how much countries are relying on Article 6 finance, how much they are relying on national budgets and traditional international cooperation rather than voluntary cooperation, which is the title of Article 6. And Article 6 markets, I think that they should contribute to ambition. And if a country's strategy is tied to a market, we also need some kind of buffer mechanisms, because markets are defined by offer and demand, right? And if you don't get the offer and demand that you were expecting in a determined year, you would have to have other mechanisms to comply with your NDC. So it's complicated. Article 6 has all the technicalities of double counting and etc. and environmental integrity. So I think this is a context that, of course, needs a lot of capacity building for countries if they intend to make use of Article 6 to comply with their Paris obligations. Over.
Thank you. That was an excellent question to bring this topic, very sensitive and very delicate, that we need to move forward with that. I don't know, Rita, do we have more time for questions? Yes, somebody wants from the audience. So listening to all of you, I had some questions maybe or information from my side. And for example, for Natalie, being that last year the PCCB hosted the Youth in Capacity Building. It was very successful. So what are your views on how the youth are going to be for capacity building in youth in the implementation of NDCs in this process?
Okay. I was still starstruck by Fernanda, and I wanted to add something on something that she said, which was that that's not the question, but I'll go there.
That is fine.
But the thing is that she said that we needed to be careful with the establishment of these carbon markets and the rules and everything, right? Because it's very sensitive, and I'm starting to feel proud of what we have done, because actually we are training people on MRB, on avoiding double accounting,
Yes.
and establishing a very robust MRB by a national decree established by the president, and then going to the Paris rulebook and training people on both things, you know. And and I wanted to say that. So thank you for, you know, highlighting that. The other thing about youth is that we are very excited with the involvement of youth and the capacity building that we're doing for them. We are working right now in 3 initiatives as an immediate response to what is established in our NDC on youth, gender, and other transversal topics. And we are training our youth to understand the convention, to understand these mandates, and to get involved in the decision-making process. So the youth of the Dominican Republic is very active. As you will see in the program, we have more than 7 events focused on youth and empowerment for climate action. And this comes directly from our NDC. We coordinate in the G77 in China, both capacity building and ACE, and we are trying to bring that to the country, to bring that to the youth and give them the capacities they need to go with those and advocate for what they need as the future generation. Right now, we launch with UNICEF and Vice President Al Gore the Climate Reality Project, Dominican Republic, with the Ministry of Youth. We are working with another youth coalition on training very high skilled youth people from 16 to 21 years old to get involved in our delegation and go to the convention with us. And we are working also with the ACE team of the convention on capacity needs assessment for youth in the Dominican Republic. And of course, from the Ministry of Environment perspective, since we are facing a global crisis with climate change, with an environmental issue, we are there, but actually we want the Ministry of Youth to take the lead on how to involve their stakeholders in that term.
Do you want me to respond on youth? I can if you like. But
Excuse me?
should I respond to the same question?
I had a question for
Okay,
you.
sure.
Yes. If anybody still wants to intervene, because we're just almost at the end of the side event. But if not, probably with NDC Partnership in your role, what would you be like more precise on what are the gaps and needs identified, like on your like an overview of that?
As I mentioned, I think, and I mean, as we've all been emphasizing, ability to mobilize resources for the strategies already in place remains a key support gap. I think there are a number of ways of addressing that. We've seen the embedding of climate finance advisors, for example, really instrumentally move forward a country's efforts to do that. But I think this is a moving target and something that I'd really like to see a little bit more innovation around if possible. some of the aspects that I mentioned previously related to coming up with more innovative mechanisms to try to mobilize those resources. That's something that I know that the ECCB, for example, has actively been pursuing in the Caribbean. I know that the Dominican Republic is now that it's in the process of launching its updated NDC implementation plan, will be turning its attention to that and starting those conversations with donors to try to get some response to the commitments that the country has made and the planning that it's done. So yeah, that continues to be a key support gap, maybe just on the youth point, because I think this is another area where the programming has been lacking. I've seen a real uptick in the last couple of months, even in interest around this issue, also because of the work that ACE is doing. One example that's been really encouraging, for example, has been the Bahamas, which recently organized a regional conference of youth, I think at the beginning of July, on this topic, and has rolled out a training program specifically targeting youth both in the Bahamas and across the region to try to capacitate them to participate in events like COP and other fora, and really have that background knowledge that they need on the various specialized topics, all of these terms that we all throw around like they're nothing. So I think that's another area where more could definitely be done, but I've been really encouraged to see the progress being made. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarice. And maybe for Dr. Carvalho, we know that you have a study, that WWF assessing NDC in Latin America and the Caribbean. What would be like an example or recommendations from your side that you have seen in this assessment that you could share with us?
Well, I think that sharing lessons, or every opportunity of sharing lessons and discussions about NDCs and the challenges, there are some challenges that are common, some are at the country level, but from what we have seen in comparison to the other regions, this region is a region that's sort of a front runner, has 5 NDCs we want, and we set a high bar for NDCs we want. And I think that focusing on structural sectors to connecting this to the question on youth is very, very key, because we see NDCs not as a technical document about climate, but really, as a social pact to tackle climate issues. And that implies working on sectors such as education, training, jobs. The youth will take the jobs from the future. They are the ones who will be, having to take much of the measures that we are putting in place today. So I think it's really, really important to think about, really a systemic change that focuses on key structural sectors rather than just the traditional sectors that are causing pollution, or pollution and emissions, and that will have to also focus from an adaptation perspective. So I think this is very, very important. LAC has been doing that. And I think also it's important to think about the uniquenesses of LAC. And I said that the other day in an OECD event, that I think we need to connect NDCs to a development vision that is a LAC vision that accounts for the LAC diversities. We are one of the richest biodiversity areas in the world, so that has to policies to conserve biodiversity have to be well integrated in NDCs. Some of them already are in countries like Colombia, for example. Costa Rica are the examples that come to mind. And also social policies that contemplate our differences. Gender participation is also an example in some countries like Ecuador, like Panama, in the planning process of the NDCs. And indigenous peoples, local communities, we are a rich region on this. They should participate. So those are the aspects I would highlight. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Carvalho, for your words, and we take note. I hope everybody has enjoyed the panelists. We thank the panelists and the audience for being here today. I hope you take elements that you can bring home to share. I know there's a group of youth from my country here that I know that they are going to have lessons learned from this exchange. So before we finish, I would just like to remind you that in order to foster regional collaborations among stakeholders beyond this side event, the PCCB and the PCCB Network welcome organizations from Latin American and the Caribbean region to join the network. Throughout the year, we work with many organizations from the LAC region, and we surely have room for many, many more. I think the last count we did, we had more than 180 participation members in the PCCB network. Because it seeks to engage stakeholders involved in climate-related capacity building and aims to act as a platform for members to exchange knowledge and experiences on good practices of their work. And there's again our QR code in the screen for all links to the PCCB and the PCCB network pages, the UNFCCC capacity building LinkedIn group as well, that you can find us. And most importantly, the post-event surveys that we'll really appreciate your feedback. And with that being said, we close this event. I wish you all the best for the rest of the day and enjoy our host with all the events that are going to place in the rest of the week. Thank you very much.